Hare Krishna devotees, welcome to day 84 of our Bhakti Vaibhava seminar on Srimad Bhagavatam Canto 4. And we're in the 29th chapter of the 4th canto, talks between Narada and King Prachanabarhi. And we have reached verse 60. There's the section, it's a substantial section from verse 60 to verse 79. There are only, about 85 or 383 something verses, so this is a very important section titled Narada Preaches to the King. Let us begin with our prayers. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastyatya Shatarane Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadha Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare Hare Vanchkapatarubhyas cha kripa sindubhya eva cha Patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Right, so here we go, devotees. It's section 9. Narada preaches to the king, verse 60 to verse 79. So, first of all, devotees, we begin with verse 60. The great sage Narada continued. The living entity acts in a gross body in this life. This body is forced to act by the subtle body composed of mind, intelligence, and ego. After the gross body is lost, the subtle body is still there to enjoy or suffer. Thus, there is no change. So in other words, Narada Muni is continuing addressing this point of how can it be that someone enjoys or suffers reactions in the next life for activities they performed in this life. So he's addressing that point and just in general talking about the procedures of karma from one life to another. Okay, so verse 61. The living entity, while dreaming, gives up the actual living body. Through the activities of his mind and intelligence, he acts in another body, either as a god or a dog. After giving up this gross body, the living entity enters either an animal body or a demigod's body on this planet or on another planet. He thus enjoys the results of the actions of his past life. Verse 62. The living entity labors under the bodily conception of I am this, I am that. My duty is this, and therefore I shall do it. These are all mental impressions, and all these activities are temporary. Nonetheless, by the grace of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the living entity gets a chance to execute all his mental concoctions. Thus he gets another body. 63. One can understand the mental or conscious position of the living entity by the activities of two kinds of senses: the knowledge-acquiring senses and the executive senses. Similarly, by the mental condition or consciousness of a person, one can understand his position in the previous life. Wow, this is now very deep transcendental psychology. It really is. Verse 64. Sometimes we suddenly experience something that was never experienced in the present body by sight or hearing. Sometimes we see such things suddenly in dreams. Verse 65. Therefore, my dear king, the living entity who has a subtle mental covering develops all kinds of thoughts and images because of his previous body. Take this from me as certain. There is no possibility of concocting anything mentally without having perceived it in the previous body. 66. O king, all good fortune unto you. The mind is the cause of the living entities attaining a certain type of body in accordance with his association with material nature. According to one's mental composition, one can understand what the living entity was in his past life, as well as what kind of body he will have in the future. Thus the mind indicates the past and future bodies. 67. Sometimes in a dream, we see something never experienced or heard of in this life. But all these incidents have been experienced at different times, in different places, and in different conditions. Verse 68. The mind of the living entity continues to exist in various gross bodies, and according to one's desires for sense gratification, the mind records different thoughts. In the mind, these appear together in different combinations. Therefore, these images sometimes appear as things never seen or never heard before. 69. Krishna consciousness means constantly associating with the Supreme Personality of Godhead in such a mental state that the devotee can observe the cosmic manifestation exactly as the Supreme Personality of Godhead does. Such observation is not always possible, but it becomes manifest exactly like the dark planet known as Rahu, which is observed in the presence of the full moon. Verse 70. As long as there exists the subtle material body composed of intelligence, mind, senses, sense objects, and the reactions of the material qualities, the consciousness of false identification and its relative objective, the gross body, exist as well. 71. When the living entity is in deep sleep, when he faints, when there is some great shock on account of severe loss, at the time of death, or when the body temperature is very high, the movement of the life air is arrested. At that time, the living entity loses knowledge of identifying the body with the self. 72. When one is a youth, all the 10 senses and the mind are completely visible. However, in the mother's womb or in the boyhood state, the sense organs and the mind remain covered, just as the full moon is covered by the darkness of the dark moon night. 73. When the living entity dreams, the sense objects are not actually present. However, because one has associated with the sense objects, they become manifest. Similarly, the living entity with undeveloped senses does not cease to exist materially, even though he may not be exactly in contact with the sense objects. 74. The 5 sense objects, the 5 sense organs, the 5 knowledge-acquiring senses, and the mind are the 16 material expansions. These combine with the living entity and are influenced by the 3 modes of material nature. Thus, the existence of the conditioned soul is understood. 75. By virtue of the processes of the subtle body, the living entity develops and gives up gross bodies. This is known as the transmigration of the soul. Thus, the soul becomes subjected to different types of so-called enjoyment, lamentation, fear, happiness, and unhappiness. 76 and 77. The caterpillar transports itself from one leaf to another by capturing one leaf before giving up the other. Similarly, according to his previous work, the living entity must capture another body before giving up the one he has. This is because the mind is the reservoir of all kinds of desires. 78. As long as we desire to enjoy sense gratification, we create material activities. When the living entity acts in the material field, he enjoys the senses, and while enjoying the senses, he creates another series of material activities. In this way, the living entity becomes entrapped as a conditioned soul. 79. You should always know that this cosmic manifestation is created, maintained, and annihilated by the will of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Consequently, everything within this cosmic manifestation is under the control of the Lord. To be enlightened by this perfect knowledge, one should always engage himself in the devotional service of the Lord. So let's go back. It's section 9. Narada preaches to the king, verse 60 to verse 79. 60. The great sage Narada continued, the living entity acts in a gross body in this life. This body is forced to act by the subtle body, composed of mind, intelligence, and ego. After the gross body is lost, the subtle body is still there to enjoy or suffer. Thus, there is no change. That's pretty powerful. Right, okay, let's have a look at Prabhupada's purport. Prabhupada's explaining the gross, or rather Narada's explaining the gross and subtle bodies, and we enjoy through the subtle body of mind, intelligence, and ego, and the gross body is the instrumental outer covering for the experience of enjoyment, or whatever. Yes, maybe the experience of suffering too. So when the gross body is lost, its root, the mind, intelligence, and ego, are always there. Yes. The subtle body's activities, pious or impious, create another situation for the living entity to enjoy or suffer in the next gross body. So thus, the subtle body continues, whereas the gross body changes. The gross bodies change one after another. Second paragraph. As the modern scientists and philosophers are too materialistic, and their knowledge is also taken away by the illusory energy, maya parita jnana, so they can't explain how the gross body is changing. Darwin tried, but because he didn't know of the subtle body or the soul, so he couldn't explain the evolutionary process in proper terms. So you may change the gross body, but Prabhupada says you work in the subtle body. But because they don't understand the activities of the subtle body, they're bewildered about how the changes of the gross body affect one. Yes. How the actions of one gross body affect another gross body. So the activities of the subtle body are also guided by the Supersoul, as Bhagavad Gita, guess what verse? Chapter 15, verse 15 explains, Savasya chaham ridi sanivishto matasmriti jnanam apanam cha. I'm seated in everyone's heart, and from me come remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. Third paragraph. So because the Supersoul is always guiding the individual soul, the individual soul also knows how to act according to the reactions of past karma. Very typical there is, with humans you can see it, but like in certain animals. Just the other day, what was it? It was this week or last week? Last week, I was at the dentist's. Oh, Krishna, for an hour and a half lying there. Whew. But they have a screen up by the ceiling, and they play nature videos. Yeah, all these videos of different species and what they do in different parts of the world and all that. And so that day last week, they had a video of a horse. A horse has just given birth to the baby horse, the foal, just like an hour ago or something. And the baby horse, within, on the same day, definitely on the same day that he or she has come out of the womb of the mother, the baby horse suddenly gets up and starts walking and moving and then gradually running around on the same day. Where's that coming from? Where's that coming from? It's not being learned in this lifetime, but it's coming from the previous lifetime. Verse 61, the living entity while dreaming gives up the actual living body. Through the activities of his mind and intelligence, he acts in another body, either as a god or a dog. After giving up this gross body, the living entity enters either an animal body or a demigod's body on this planet or on another planet. He thus enjoys the results of the actions of his past life. Okay. So, here's Prabhupada's purport. The root of the distress and happiness is that the root is the subtle body. Mind, intelligence, false ego. But a gross body is still required as the instrument for enjoying. If the person doesn't get a new gross body, he's going to have to exist just in the subtle body as a ghost. So as stated in this verse, Shayanam imam utsrijya shwasantam. So Prabhupada explains, the gross body may lie on a bed and rest. And even though the machinery of the gross body is working, the living entity may go into a dream, and then return to the gross body. Prabhupada's talking about very interesting and very sort of extraordinary thing. How we dream. That when we dream, the subtle body may go out of the gross body and go somewhere else and experience all of that and then come back. That's what Prabhupada's saying. The living entity may leave, go into a dream, and then return to the gross body. And when he returns, he forgets, usually, not always, not completely always, but oftentimes just forget the dream. So similarly, when we get another gross body, we forget the previous gross body. So the conclusion is that the subtle body, mind, intelligence, false ego, creates an atmosphere with desires and ambitions that the living entity enjoys in the subtle body. So the living entity is in the subtle body, and the activities in the subtle body are illusory because they're impermanent. So liberation, what does liberation mean? Getting out of the clutches of the subtle body. Yes. So liberation from the gross body simply involves the transmigration of the soul from one gross body to another. That's all. So, but when the mind is educated in Krishna consciousness or higher consciousness in the mode of goodness, you get transferred to either the higher planets or to the spiritual world, to the Vaikuntha planets. Yeah. So we have to change our consciousness through hearing the Vedic literatures from the Lord through disciplic succession. So if we train the subtle body in this life by always thinking of Krishna, we'll go to Krishna Loka after leaving the gross body. And Prabhupada points out that Lord Krishna confirms this. Bhagavad Gita 4:9. Janma karma chamedavyam evam yoviti tatvataha chaktvadeham panar janma naiti mameti sorjana. Prabhupada gives the actual translation. It's Bhagavad Gita chapter 4 verse 9. One who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities does not, upon leaving the body, take his birth again in this material world, but attains my eternal abode, O Arjuna. So therefore, we're on to the second paragraph. What a crucial point this is. The change of the gross body is not so important. But the change of the subtle body, that's important. And that's what this Krishna consciousness movement is doing. Getting everyone, helping everyone to change their subtle bodies. And Prabhupada gives ideal example was Maharaj Ambarish. He engaged his mind on the lotus feet of Krishna, speech and describing Krishna, ears hearing about Krishna. So if we do like that, we'll go back to Godhead. So when the mind, intelligence, and ego are purified, all the active senses of the living entity become spiritual, and thus the living entity gets his Satchitananda spiritual form. Yeah, so the contamination occurs when we come to the material world and we want sense gratification, material enjoyment. So Prabhupada says, the Lord describes how to go back to Godhead. Manmanabhava madbhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru mame vaishyasi yuktvaivam atmanam matparayana. Always think of me, become my devotee, worship me, offer your homage unto me. Being completely absorbed in me, surely you'll come to me. So this is all to do with the change of the subtle body. Think of me, become my devotee, worship me. It's all change of subtle body, which impacts on the gross body, of course. 62. The living entity labors under the bodily conception of I am this, I am that. My duty is this, and therefore I shall do it. These are all mental impressions, and all these activities are temporary. Nonetheless, by the grace of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the living entity gets a chance to execute all his mental concoctions. Thus he gets another body from his mental concoctions. So Prabhupada explains, if you're in the bodily conception of life, your activities will be too. If your subtle body if you're thinking, I am this body and my life is the life of the body, your activities will be like that. We see how, Prabhupada says, we see how nations compete. Men compete, all under the name of advancement of civilization. Many plans for making the body comfortable, and they're carried out in the subtle body after the distraction of the gross body. Yes, so Narada Muni says that at death, you take your plans with you to execute them. You get another gross body. Yeah. This is called Punarbhava. Yes, okay. So when the gross body is finished, the plans are there in the mind, and by the grace of the Lord, the living entity goes into the next body and gets the chance to carry out those plans from the previous body in the next body. This is the law of karma. As long as the mind's absorbed in the laws of karma, certain type of body must be accepted in the next life. Second paragraph. So karma, what is karma? Is the aggregate of fruitive activities conducted to make this body comfortable or uncomfortable. And Prabhupada says, Srila Prabhupada says that he has actually had the experience of a man who was about to die asking a doctor to let him live another 4 years so he could finish his plans. So it means that while dying, he's thinking of his plans. So after his death, he will surely carry those plans with him in the subtle body and try to manifest them again. And he's getting that chance by the grace of the super soul. And Prabhupada again quotes Bhagavad Gita 15:15. That, one will be supplied remembrance, forgetfulness, intelligence in the next birth, and then begin to execute the plans which were begun in the previous life. So then Prabhupada quotes Bhagavad Gita 18:61. It's also an important verse. The Supreme Lord situated in everyone's heart, O Arjuna, and is directing the wanderings of all living entities who are seated as on a machine made of the material energy. Right. So while sitting on the next body, sitting in the next body, sitting on it, then the living entity is reminded by the super soul what he should do. So this goes on. He goes all over the universe, different designations, Kshatriya, Brahmin, American, whatever. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, there's no point in becoming a Brahmin in preference to an American, or becoming an American in preference to a Negro. After all, these are all bodily conceptions under the modes of material nature. Verse 63, one can understand the mental or conscious position of a living entity by the activities of two kinds of senses, the knowledge-acquiring senses and the executive senses. Similarly, by the mental condition or consciousness of a person, one can understand his position in the previous life. So the point is understanding a person's position in the previous life, and understanding in this life for that matter, So Prabhupada quotes famous proverb, the face is the index of the mind. If a person's angry, it'll be expressed in his face. If the person's blissful and happy, it'll be expressed in the face. If the person is sleepy, it'll be expressed through the face. Yeah. So in other words, the activities of the gross body are reactions of the mental condition. The mind's activities are thinking, feeling, and willing. And the willing, particularly the willing part of the mind's activities, is manifest by the activities of the gross body. Yeah. So in other words, if a person's mind is Krishna conscious, then the body of the person will also act in Krishna consciousness. Well, yeah. When the mind joins with a sense, it immediately manifests in a certain way. When anger is in the mind, then the mind joins with the tongue, and the tongue vibrates bad things. When the mind's anger expressed through the hand, there's fighting. When the mind's anger or whatever is expressed through the leg, it's expressed by kicking. So the mind of a Krishna conscious person acts in the same way. When you're thinking of Krishna, the tongue will chant Hare Krishna, the hands will be raised in ecstasy, the legs will dance. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, these symptoms are technically called Ashta Sattvika Bhava, Ashta Sattvika Vikara, from Chaitanya Charitamrita Anchalila, chapter 14, verse 99, which then continues on. Sattvika Vikara is transformation of the mental condition in goodness, or sometimes transcendental ecstasy. Verse 64. Sometimes we suddenly experience something that was never experienced in the present body by sight or hearing. Sometimes we see such things suddenly in dreams. Wow, isn't that amazing? So Srila Prabhupada makes the point that the mind is like a storehouse. Sometimes we see things in dreams which we never saw in this life. Yes, sometimes in dreams we think we're flying in the sky. I mean, just as is, not in an aeroplane. That means that once in a previous life, either as a demigod or astronaut, we flew in the sky. The impression is there in the stockpile of the mind. The mind's like a storehouse, a stockpile. But then, even though it's there in the stockpile, it may be buried deep, in some big pile. But then it may suddenly express itself. And Prabhupada says it can be seen as being like fermentation taking place in the depths of the water, which sometimes manifests as bubbles on the water's surface. So sometimes we dream of coming to a place we've never known or experienced in this lifetime. But this is proof that in a past life we experienced this. There's research being done into that. It's not really like regular science, but, like regression, and sometimes people go to a place but they know that previously the place was constructed differently, but they've never been to this place in this lifetime at all, maybe like in a foreign country, something like that. So Prabhupada says the impression is kept in the mind. and later becomes manifest in dream or in thought. So the conclusion is that the mind is a storehouse of thoughts and experiences from past lives. In this way, there's continuation from one life to another. So this is addressing the question of Prajnaparishat. How is it possible? I mean, what's the practicality that you do something in this life and you get the reaction in the next life? Yeah. All right, so this is also, Prabhupada gives another evidence. This is also sometimes proved by saying or seeing someone is a born poet or a scientist or a devotee. They just start coming up with these types of things. So if like Maharaj Ambarish, we think of Krishna constantly now, then at death we'll certainly be transferred back to Godhead. Yeah. And even if our attempt at Krishna consciousness is not complete in this life, but our Krishna consciousness will continue in the next life. And Prabhupada quotes Bhagavad Gita, chapter 6, verse 41. I'll just read the translation. The unsuccessful yogi, after many, many years of enjoyment on the planets of the pious living entities, is born into a family of righteous people or into a family of rich aristocracy. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, if we rigidly follow the principles of meditation on Krishna, there is no doubt that in our next life we will be transferred to Krishna Loka, Goloka Vrindavan. Right, verse 65. Verse 65. Therefore, my dear king, the living entity, who has a subtle mental covering, develops all kinds of thoughts and images because of his previous body. Take this from me as certain. There is no possibility of concocting anything mentally without having perceived it in the previous body. Right, so Prabhupada begins the purport by quoting from Prema Vivarta, Krishna Bahir Mukhahana Bhogavanchakari. Prabhupada gives the translation. When an individual soul forgets his eternal relationship with God and tries to lord it over the material nature or resources, that condition, that forgetful condition, is called Maya or illusion. So, as stated in previous verse, the mind is a storehouse of past desires. We have the present body on that basis. That's how we get these bodies, because we desired them. And in our next lives, in these bodies, we're naturally inclined to do the things we did in the previous life. So, Prabhupada says, similarly, whatever we desire in this present body will be expressed in a future body, and thus the mind is the source of different kinds of bodies. Second paragraph. If the mind is purified by Krishna consciousness, you'll naturally get a spiritual body full of Krishna consciousness. This is our original form. As Lord Chaitanya said, Majjalila 2108, Jivera Swarupoya Krishnera Nichadas. Every living entity is constitutionally an eternal servant of Krishna. So if someone is now engaged in devotional service, he must be considered a liberated soul, even in this life. And Prabhupada, to take it further, Prabhupada cites Srila Rupa Goswami, famous verse, Iha yasya haredasya karmana manasagira, Nikolas vapyavastasu jivan muktasu uchite. One who engages in the transcendental service of the Lord in body, mind, and words is to be considered liberated in all conditions of material existence. It's from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So this Krishna consciousness movement is based on this principle. Teach people to absorb themselves always in Krishna consciousness, because that is their natural position. And the same point we just read from Rupa Goswami, to be considered liberated, if you're fully engaged in the service of the Lord, body, mind, and words, you must be considered liberated. So, Bhagavad Gita 14:26 basically has the same message. Mam chiyo vyabhicharena bhakti yogena sevate sagunan samatichaitan brahma bhuyai kalpate. One who always engages in the spiritual activities of unalloyed devotional service at once transcends the modes of material nature and is elevated to the spiritual platform. I mean, it is interesting, how Prabhupada changes the translations a bit in terms of the circumstances a verse is being quoted in. So therefore the devotee is above the modes and is transcendental to the Brahman platform. Or not to the Brahman, to the spiritual platform. So therefore a devotee is above the modes and transcendental to the Brahman platform. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, a pure devotee who is free from all material desires, experienced on the mental platform, and is also free from empiric philosophical speculation or fruit of activity, is always above material conditioning and is always liberated. I mean, this is getting really deep and really scientific. 66. O King, all good fortune unto you. The mind is the cause of the living entities attaining a certain type of body in accordance with his association with material nature. According to one's mental composition, one can understand what the living entity was in his past life, as well as what kind of body he'll have in the future. Thus the mind indicates the past and future bodies. So, okay, Prabhupada gives very interesting purport. The mind is the index of information about your past and future bodies. So if a person is a devotee now, it indicates he cultivated devotional service in his previous life. But if one's mind is criminal, then he must have been a criminal in the last life. So according to the mind, we can understand what will happen in the future life. And Prabhupada quotes Bhagavad Gita 14:18. Urvam gachanti sattvasta madhye tishtanti rajasa jaganya guna vritti sta ado gachanti tamasa. Those situated in the mode of goodness gradually go upward to the higher planets. Those in the mode of passion live on the earthly planets, and those in the mode of ignorance go down to the hellish planets. It all depends on your mind, what you've done and your state of mind. So, okay, let's have a look at second paragraph. If a person is in goodness, his mental activities will promote him to the heavenly planets. Similarly, if he has a low mentality, his future will also be abominable. So the lives of the living entities, past and future, are indicated by the mental condition. So Narada blesses the king that he won't desire anything. He won't plan for sense gratification as he did before when he was organizing the sacrifices for the heavenly planets. So Narada wanted him to give up mental concoction. I mean, Narada's really preaching very intensely. So all the bodies in the heavenly planets and hellish planets arise from mental concoctions. Sufferings and enjoyments of material life are simply on the mental platform. And Prabhupada quotes Bhagavatam 5.18.12, which talks about Manoratha. Manoratha. Mana means the mind. Ratha means chariot. Chariot of the mind. I won't read the verse, the Sanskrit, but the translation. One who has unflinching devotion for the personality of Godhead has all the good qualities of the demigods. But one who is not a devotee of the Lord has only material qualifications that are of little value. This is because he's hovering on the mental plane and is certain to be attracted by the glaring material energy. Unless you become a fully Krishna conscious devotee, you're going to hover on the mental platform and go up and down in different bodies. All the good qualities, mode of goodness qualities on the material level, they have no value because they won't save a person from birth and death. So we should be without mental desire. As Rupa Goswami says, Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, Anyabhilashita shunyam jnana karmadhyanavritam. Madhya Lila 19.167, Chaitanya Charitamrita. One should be fully free from material desires, philosophical speculation, and fruit of activity. The best course for a human being is to favorably accept the transcendental devotional service of the Lord. That is the highest perfection of life. Verse 67. Sometimes in a dream we see something never experienced or heard of in this life, but all these incidents have been experienced at different times, in different places, and in different conditions. So this is, Prabhupada says in a previous verse, it was explained that in dreams we see what we've experienced during the day. So, but why is it that we sometimes in our dreams see what we've never heard of or seen during this life? This is the same point as verse 64. Prabhupada just says in a previous verse, it's verse 64. So sometimes these impressions, different experiences we have, they combine. So we have some sort of, like fantastic dream. It's just, Prabhupada mentions an ocean on top of a mountain. How's that? We may see an ocean on the peak of a mountain, or we may see that the ocean is dried up. These are just combinations of different experiences from different times. A golden mountain means we've seen gold, we've seen a mountain, now they combine. Seeing stars during the day. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, the conclusion is that these are all mental concoctions, although they have actually been experienced in different circumstances. They have simply combined together in a dream. This fact is further explained in the following verse 68. The mind of the living entity continues to exist in various gross bodies, and according to one's desires for sense gratification, the mind records different thoughts. In the mind, these appear together in different combinations. Therefore, these images sometimes appear as things never seen or never heard before. Right, so, we've been discussing this in one way or another the last few verses. So here Prabhupada says, the activities of the living entity, for example, in the body of a dog, then may be experienced in the mind, which is in a different body. So the mind continues, the body changes. Yeah, so therefore these things are possible. It may seem very strange, but they're recorded in the mind. So sometimes they come up in dreams. So, but anyway, the thing is, unless we're fully absorbed in Krishna consciousness, material desires will just come and go. That's the mind. If the mind, we need to train the mind. If the mind is not meditating on the lotus feet of the Lord, we'll find we desire material enjoyment. So those sensual images are recorded in the mind, Prabhupada says, in chronological order, and they become manifest one after another. Therefore, the living entity has to accept one body after another. The mind plans material enjoyment. The gross body is the instrument for carrying out those plans for material enjoyment. So Narottam Das Thakur says, Guru Mukha Padma Vakya Chitte Te Kuriya Aikya, Arna Kuriya Mane Asha. That's from Gurvastakam. So he advises everyone to stick to the principle of carrying out the orders of the spiritual master. One shouldn't desire anything else. If the regulative principles ordered by the spiritual master are followed rigidly, the mind will gradually be trained to desire nothing but the service of Krishna. Such training is the perfection of life. Right, so on we go, devotees, to verse 69. Krishna consciousness means constantly associating with the Supreme Personality of Godhead in such a state in such a mental state that the devotee can observe the cosmic manifestation exactly as the Supreme Personality of Godhead does. Such observation is not always possible, but it becomes manifest exactly like the dark planet known as Rahu, which is observed in the presence of the full moon. We've just read how desires become visible one after the other, on the mental platform. But sometimes it happens by Krishna's arrangement. The whole stockpile can be visible all at once. Yes, so, that's something really special. Brahma Samhita, verse 54 says, when a person's fully absorbed in Krishna consciousness, his stockpile of material desires is minimized. Indeed, the desires no longer fructify in the form of gross bodies. Instead, the stockpile of desires becomes visible on the mental platform by the grace of the Supreme Lord. Srila Prabhupada explains about eclipses. The lunar eclipse is Rahu's intervention. Rahu's there, according to Vedic astronomy, but generally is invisible, but sometimes visible in full moonlight. Then he appears to exist somewhere near the orbit of the moon. And Prabhupada says, the failure of modern moon excursionists may be due to the Rahu planet. I mean, we don't really know, but maybe due. In other words, instead of going to the moon, they may go to Rahu and then come back. But anyway, the point is the living entity has immense desires for material enjoyment, and he has to transmigrate until they're exhausted. Then third paragraph. No living entity is free from the cycle of birth and death unless he or she is Krishna conscious. So in this verse it's clearly stated, Satvaika that when one is fully absorbed in Krishna consciousness, in one stroke he's freed from past and future mental desires. Then by the grace of the Lord, everything simultaneously manifests within the mind. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur gives the example of Mother Yashoda seeing the cosmos in Krishna's mouth. Yeah. By his grace, Krishna's grace, she saw all the universes, all the planets in her mouth. She even saw herself, actually. So similarly, by the grace of the Lord, the devotee can see all dormant desires at one time and finish all future transmigrations. So this facility is especially given to the devotee to make his path clear for returning home back to Godhead. And Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, because a Krishna conscious person does not have to accept a future gross body, his recorded desires are fulfilled in a dream. We therefore sometimes find things in a dream never experienced in our present life. Hare Krishna. We will carry on tomorrow. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.